Alright, we finally got all the parts together and received the block back from machining, and it's all ready for assembly. So, first thing we're going to do, we're going to mask it off, and we're going to paint it, and then we'll get started on assembly. Alright, now that the block's freshly painted, and everything's looking good, we've got our oil squirters installed, and we're going to install the camshaft, and it's mostly in. And we're going to lube up the journals, all nice and pretty. Just like that. This is the thrust bearing, and it goes in the center saddle, and it controls the forward and aft motion of the crankshaft with the thrust surfaces. So we install the thrust bearing first. And then they've all been measured, and everything is perfect in spec as long as you put them in the right spot. And these are the factory GM red bearings, which are actually pretty darn good bearings. So here we've got number 2 going into the number 2 saddle. And then skip number 3 because of thrust bearing, and we got number 4. And number 5. Alright. Did you pause that? And for assembly, I have always used just standard SPT motor honey. I find that is fantastic for protecting against break-in. Nothing expensive, nothing fancy, just regular old SPT motor honey. Good and thick. Alright, let's lay in the crankshaft. And there's the crankshaft. Installed and spinning freely. Beautiful crank. Now we're going to get the main studs and the caps and start installing the main studs and the caps. Number 3 in with the thrust bearing. And here we're at. We've got the main seated. We've got all the studs in place. We set the thrust and the crankshaft, and everything is butter smooth. Oh. Let's go ahead and start buttoning down the main studs. Alright, here we are with the rods and pistons installed in the engine. And one thing you want to make sure, first off, when you install number 1 piston, you want to make sure your oil squirters are not going to hit the aftermarket pistons. These are absolutely perfect. So, the engine rotates nice and smoothly. With the oil pump pickup installed and the high volume oil pump installed, I wasn't able to use the dual roller because of the way the keyway and the crank was. So I went with just the single roller, but I upgraded it to the C5R chain just for added peace of mind. So now we're going to install the oil pan, and then we're going to flip the engine over, and we're going to install the cylinder heads fresh from the CNC machine. Okay, before you get to the cylinder heads, don't forget to install the lifters. These are tie bar lifters. They do replace the plastic trays, and although very few instances of lifter and tray failure have occurred, it's still just a good peace of mind. I'm going to go ahead and eliminate the plastic trays, go to tie bar lifters, and we're going to get these installed. Alright, we got the tie bar lifters installed. Now we're going to clean off the deck. I like to clean off all the Sharpie marks and everything. We're going to make sure it's nice and clean. Then we're going to lay our MLS head gasket down, and we'll get the cylinder head installed. MLS head gasket's laid in, and this is a GM head gasket. It is 50 thousandths compressed thickness with a bore size of 4.080, which combined with the DSS pistons will give a compression ratio of approximately 9.1 to 1. Now, let's get the cylinder head on. Okay, we've got the cylinder head on, at least one of them. We've got the ARP studs screwed in and just barely snug down. And there's one thing I want to show you. When you do this enough, you can see a little bit of shank sticking out of the stud. On this, it's not a problem. The engine block has not been surfaced, and the cylinder head has not been surfaced. But let me show you. What you want to make sure of is that the nut will contact just the threads. So, don't worry too much. The washer is thick enough, but when you mill the heads, you can get into a problem where the stud thread length is not long enough. So, on the opposite end, the small studs, you can see, with just a nut is barely long enough. So if you seat these, you will not have enough contact with the washer. So the washer itself is pretty substantially thick. So you'll want to back the stud. You want to back the stud out of the head enough so you have flush contact. I'll show you that. So right there is 2.5 turns from bottoming out, and it's going to be different for each engine. Now that we got the head on and the nuts run down snug but not yet torqued, let's take a look at the cylinder head. These are standard casting LSA cylinder heads. Very, very good cylinder heads. But like all cylinder heads, they can really benefit from some CNC porting. This is done by Texas Speed. They have a very fast turnaround time. I got these done and back within about 2.5 weeks. They did the valve job, they did everything, and I'm very happy with it. One thing to notice, if I can get in there, You can barely see that little mark on the intake port right at the bend. It barely breaks through the threads on the rocker stands. It's not a big problem. A lot of porting does this. So what we're going to do is, since the threads have to be sealed, we're going to switch to rocker studs instead of the factory bolts, and we're going to seal them in the threads so that they do not get disturbed, and we shouldn't have a problem from there. The valves are the stock GM valves that came in the cylinder heads. The cylinder heads were brand new off the crate engine, so shouldn't have anything weird. Valve springs are good to 660 thousandths lift, which is fantastic, and they're pretty and ready to go. Let's see, I'll show you the exhaust port. This will help make really good power. Now, because it's a boosted engine, it's not as critical for the port job to make horsepower, but what it does is it does increase volume, which will lower the boost levels, and from what we see on these engines, they make the same power at a lower boost level because of the port volume size. So you can likewise turn the boost back up and make even more power on a similar boost level that you would with a stock port cylinder head. Plus, these have a unique casting bump in the intake port as factory that restricts flow that the LS3s do not have. So that's also a nice benefit of the porting, as it gets rid of that, all for flow. So let's get this cylinder head torqued down. I'll do the other cylinder head, and then we'll be ready to finish the long block. With the cylinder heads torqued down, we're all ready to go. The rocker studs are installed, and just a dab of silicone on the intake rocker studs, and we're ready to start bolting down the valve train. But I am missing push rods, so here is the rockers. They are Texas Speed roller rockers, and boy, they are pretty. So we're going to wrap this up and wait for more parts to come in. So stay tuned, and we'll finish the assembly of this motor another day. Catch you later.